So welcome, everyone. I'm Ken McLeod. I'm the policy director at the League of American Bicyclists, and I'm joined by my colleague Amelia Neptune, our Bicycle Friendly America director. And then we have a great panel. We have Jason Patton from Oakland. We have Sarah Abel from Tool Design Group, who helped us with this project when she was working for the Institute of Transportation Engineers. We have David Smith from the city of Chicago, and we have Jeremy Cuevas from the Northwest Center in Chicago. So the League of American Bicyclists is a membership-based organization that has been around since 1880. Our mission is to lead the movement to create a bicycle-friendly America for everyone. That everyone is something we've added in the last decade or so and is a really important part of our work because it makes us reflect on how we need to pursue equity in all of our efforts. And we've done that a little bit with our recent report, Reconnecting to the New Majority. And we're excited to share with you today our Benchmarking Bike Networks report. If you're interested in the league, wanting to learn more about bike advocacy, we have our National Bike Summit coming up at the end of March 27th to 30th. So we'd love for you to join us there. We had over 1,000 people online last year, and we're hoping to beat that this year. This is really made possible by the long-term benchmarking report for biking and walking, which was first published in 2007. That effort is supported by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and their Active People, Healthy Nation initiative. That initiative's goal is to get 27 million people more physically active by 2027. And this report is really helping to further the conversation about one of its chief strategies, which is to create activity-friendly routes to everyday destinations. So not just a bike lane here or there, or a sidewalk here or there, but really getting those routes to access places people need to go, places that provide services to people. So those everyday destinations that are really important to people and providing safe ways to bike and walk there. And you can find the most recent data from the benchmarking report on biking and walking at data.bikeleague.org. It is the 7th edition, and we're excited to keep that data updated and make it accessible to more people. So now is one of the best times to build bike networks. There is a lot going in favor of biking and walking right now. The bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed last fall has billions of new dollars for biking and walking. Some of the major programs that you should be aware of if you want to increase your state or local spending on biking and walking projects are the Transportation Alternatives Program, the Highway Safety Improvement Program, Safe Streets and Roads for All grants, and RAISE grants. All of those can fund biking and walking projects. Some of them have new and updated provisions that really help people access that funding and make sure that funding is improving the safety of people who bike and walk. We're also really excited that the Biden administration and Secretary Buttigieg at USDOT has published their National Roadway Safety Strategy just a couple of weeks ago and is really pursuing a safe system approach with that strategy. For biking, one of the exciting things that USDOT has recently done is recognize bicycle lanes as a proven safety countermeasure, and hopefully separated or protected bike lanes will be recognized in the same way soon. That bipartisan infrastructure law also has a little policy changes that can add up to make a big impact. One of those is a section that allows local governments to use whatever standards that they have adopted for their locality on locally owned roads. So if you have a local road and you want to use a NACTO Urban Design Guide or Urban Bikeway Design Guide, and you own that road, you can do that with federal funding and you won't be preempted by your state. Other things in the Highway Safety Improvement Program, protected bike lanes are defined as a highway safety improvement project. And for highway safety programs, which is kind of the education, enforcement, behavioral change programs run by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, they struck all uses of the word accident and replaced it with crash. So that's a good policy change to make sure that what we are talking about in traffic violence are crashes that are preventable and not accidents that just happen. We don't have to accept things as accidents, and we can solve crashes. So very high level, the Benchmarking Bike Networks report, the takeaways are: no community succeeds in building bike networks without having plans. You need to plan with your community to build bike networks. In all of the cities that we talked to, repaving was a key way that they built bike facilities. So maximizing your repaving schedule and coordinating bike improvements with that is a major way to accelerate your bike network. We also heard a lot about changing culture at departments of transportation to support bike network development, investing in data to kind of understand what is there in the built environment and how it changes over time. And then really the motivation for why these communities want to build bike networks, provide those everyday or activity-friendly routes to everyday destinations, and serve the people of their community with safe biking and walking infrastructure. Every city had a good, clear explanation of why they were making better bike networks to serve their community, and being able to articulate that why and engage your community is really important to build bike networks. And then just a little bit about using the report. We're really excited about people using the context guides. This is really kind of using readily available information from the Federal Highway Administration's Bikeway Selection Guide, and hopefully making it easier for people to kind of grasp and present to decision makers by breaking down some of those features in that guide. It's also, there's some great network principles to just kind of help people talk about what makes a great network. This is something that Federal Highway Administration really developed through kind of exchanges with international community to see those best practices about what a good network feels and looks like. And then finally, the case studies, which you will hear directly from some of the communities today. But each of them has a slightly different story about why their network evolved and how they did it. And there's hopefully lessons for your community of any size in those case studies to kind of connect to what you're doing today. And with that, I will stop my share and I will hand it over to Sarah Abel, who will get more into the safe system approach that is in the National Roadway Safety Strategy and throughout this report.
You're muted, Sarah.
Yep, I had to exit out in order to unmute myself. Apologies. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to work with you all on the bicycle benchmarking report while I was at the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and have recently changed over to tool design. And I'm excited to be doing the safe system approach and bike network planning on the ground again. So I'll walk you through some of the basics of the safe system approach and how this ties into benchmarking for bicycle networks, which is mentioned in the report. So our current reality, and this is updated with the most recent statistics, is that 1.3 million people are killed globally each year as part of traffic crashes. The United Nations Decade of Action for Global Road Safety was just updated late last year and goes through 2030. So hopefully we continue to see reductions in traffic fatalities internationally. 31,720 people were killed between January and September 2021. These are the latest estimates from NHTSA with regard to traffic fatalities in 2021. As many of you know, we saw an increase in fatalities during 2020, even though vehicle miles traveled were reduced, and saw an increase over that in 2021. And and I'm very sad to see this continued increase and hate to see the total estimates for 2021 when they come out. And we know that vulnerable road users, those walking, rolling, biking, those not protected by a large vehicle surrounding them, continue to be vulnerable and are a majority share of traffic fatalities in the United States. We saw a 21% increase in pedestrian fatalities per vehicle miles traveled between 2019 and 2020. We do not have pedestrian fatality estimates for 2021 yet, so this is the latest statistic. So we know that traffic fatalities are a public health crisis. To bring it full circle from the CDC, traffic fatalities were named an epidemic, which is why it's so important that we're doing this work and the CDC continues to fund this work. We know that the safe system approach works. If you look at countries like Sweden, the Netherlands, Australia, and New Zealand, who have all adopted the principles and elements and framework of the safe system, which we'll be talking about a little bit later, we know that no matter what you call it, Vision Zero, sustainable safety, safe system, or safe journeys, we know that this approach works. Sweden saw a 60 to 70% reduction in fatalities from their initial adoption of the safe system approach until 2015. And you can see the other reductions from other countries who have taken this same approach as well. So we know that it works if we fundamentally shift our approach towards systemic safety, make that commitment wholly and not incrementally, as well as looking at all of our projects, whether it's called a safety project or not, through the safe system approach. And that includes bikeways planning, which we'll talk a little bit about later. Thousands of lives are lost each year. I mean, we all know someone, and I know Secretary Buttigieg at U.S. Department of Transportation, when they released the National Roadway Safety Strategy a few weeks ago, said, and it's very true, we all know someone that was killed in a traffic crash. Let it be someone we went to high school with a young driver crash, or a bicyclist who we rode bikes with that we were friends. So 106 people die per day on average in the US on our roadways. That's 3,233 people per month. Secretary Buttigieg during the National Roadway Safety Strategy and has recently tweeted that we do not accept these fatalities. We would not accept these fatalities if they were real fatalities or plane crashes. So why do we accept them on our roads? And the safe system approach is a fundamental way to shift towards no longer accepting these traffic fatalities and taking a proactive approach to increasing safety and prioritizing safety. So what does the safe system approach mean? I'm sure some of you have seen this in other presentations, and others may have heard about this but are looking for more information on the safe system approach. So I'm going to run through this quickly, and then we'll link some additional information in the chat pod. So there are 5 elements of the safe system approach: safe road users, safe vehicles, safe speeds, safe roads, and post-crash care. I will stress that the reason why this is a circle is that these are not meant to be thought of in silo. They're meant to be thought of cyclically and together, wholly, to make the whole pie with all the pieces that you're thinking about. And then the outer ring of this covers the 6 principles. Death and serious injury are unacceptable. Humans make mistakes, but those mistakes should not result in a fatality, and we should design our system to make sure that if a crash does happen, it does not result in a fatal or serious injury. We know that humans are vulnerable, so we know that they can only withstand so much kinetic energy forces before it'll result in a fatal or serious injury crash. And we need to be thinking about the vulnerability of all road users. So we know that if there's not metal wrapped around you to protect you, you are more vulnerable to fatal and serious injury in the event of a crash. Many of you have seen the infographics that portray pedestrian fatality risk based on speeds. And that's a great way to display human vulnerability, although we have to think about that in everything everything we design. Responsibility is shared, so everyone using the transportation system, as well as designing the transportation system, let it be a city transportation director or a field operations person putting down pavement markings in your agency, we all have to think about keeping everyone safe and doing it systemically. So thinking about safety in all the projects that we do, not just the ones that are called safety projects. Safety is proactive, so making sure that we are preventing fatal and serious injury crashes from occurring. So looking at high injury network mapping, looking at taking those same crash causations and road contexts and overlaying it over an entire city, county, or state, so that we prevent those crashes from occurring on, say, if you have a high number of crashes on arterials, we should be thinking about the design of all arterials, not just the arterials where the crashes are happening. And redundancy is critical. So layering on countermeasures and making sure we're designing our bike facility types to make sure that if a crash does happen, it does not result in a fatal or serious injury crash. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So this is the shift towards the safe system approach. I already talked about these, so I'm just going to glance over this quickly and get to the fun stuff. And the important stuff is, how do we do this? How do we apply the safe system approach? And in this presentation, I'll cover bike network, bike facility types that implement the safe system approach. And what you'll see is I may highlight one, but oftentimes these incorporate multiple elements of what we call the safe system framework. And I'll link that in the chat at the end of my presentation. But anticipating human error involves separating users in space, in time, and increasing attentiveness and awareness. So the top image is from Indianapolis Cultural Trail, where it is a separated cycle track that gets all road users off of the road and onto a separated facility. You can see that there's a cycle track next to a sidewalk. So even preventing those minor crashes of collisions that may occur between a cyclist and a pedestrian, or even scooter riders, now that they're being introduced onto our networks. So this is a demonstration of how to separate users in space so that if a crash does occur, that crash is not going to result in a fatal or serious injury crash, especially where you've got higher speeds and higher volume roads. We need to sometimes get those vulnerable road users off of the road and think about those barriers that are going to prevent a crash from hitting a pedestrian or a cyclist. So vertical separation. If we've got speeds over 30, 35 miles per hour, flex posts are not going to stop a car from hitting a vulnerable road user. So separating users in space and how we design that separation to prevent a car from hitting a vulnerable road user. Moody Avenue in Portland shows how we're separating users in time with bike signals, leading pedestrian intervals and things like that. Sometimes where you've got high speed, high volume roads, separating users in time is not enough, and you need to go back to separating users in space, especially on arterials. An overpass or an underpass may be required if those volumes and those speeds are not reduced or are not able to be reduced in a way that safely accommodates human errors. Hennepin Avenue in Minneapolis, and does all three really. You see that high visibility, those markings. As you approach the intersection, you see the bike signal. If you zoom in, there is a bike signal there, so creating a designated crossing for bicyclists on this two-way cycle track. So it separates users in space, time, and increases that attentiveness and awareness. And really, anytime you're using pavement markings, high visibility crossings, green pavement, in the case of bike lanes, you're increasing that attentiveness and awareness. Accommodating human injury tolerances includes reducing speeds and reducing impact forces. And really, you're doing both whenever you're reducing speeds, but sometimes we're talking about speeding, reducing people driving above the posted speed limit, and then reducing those kinetic energy forces such as turning, slowing the movement, but that also makes people more visible. So you'll see the mini roundabout in San Francisco, California, that reduces speeds, but it also reduces those kinetic energy forces and impact forces in the event of a crash, and it separates users in space as well, and sometimes in time. A Dutch intersection or protected intersection in Chicago reduces those impact forces. I'm hoping the city of Chicago, who's presenting later, talks a little bit about this, but they took a systemic approach to looking at protected intersections as part of their bike network in the downtown loop area of Chicago. And they made adjustments to these protected intersections over time based on the human behaviors. And I think that field adjustments and going from, say, bike share to a separated bike lane, as you see that increase in ridership, is really important. And then turn hardening accommodates those and reduces those kinetic energy forces as well. And you can see that in this graphic, you're also seeing increased attentiveness and awareness through those pavement markings. And I'll note I selected this photo in particular because it uses cap sleeve bollards to do the turn hardening versus flex posts, because again, a flex post is not going to stop a car from hitting a bicyclist or a pedestrian in the event of a crash, whereas a concrete flex or a concrete bollard may. So we know if you build it safely, they will come. There's many examples of this, and I'm sure that the cities presenting today will talk about this. But when we're talking about level of traffic stress, which we included in the report, we know that certain riders feel more comfortable and are safer on the type of facility that we are putting in place. So it's not just about drawing a line on a map, but it's thinking about which segments need to be which type of facility so that people feel safe riding and they will consider biking instead of driving or other modes in order to get from point A to point B. 1% of the community is capable of riding on those strong and fearless, I apologize, the statistic on this, it should be flipped around, on those high speed, high volume roads, whereas 95% of people feel comfortable riding on a separated facility for all ages and all abilities. So bike networks and the safe system approach. Think about ways to implement the safe system approach in your bike network planning. Overlay your high injury network map, especially bike crashes, onto the bike network that you have planned. Where do you need to maybe think about separating users in space and time further, or take a standard bike lane to a separated facility where you're seeing those fatal and serious injury crashes occur? Be sure to separate users in space and time based on kinetic energy forces. So if you have an arterial where you've got high speeds, high volumes, make sure you're thinking about creating a separation that is going to prevent a fatal crash from happening. Let it be proactively or through the redundancy approach as well. So some other resources, which I'll link in the chat pod, as Ken mentioned at the beginning, we really use some of the methodologies from the FHWA Bikeway Selection Guide in the drafting framework and LTS approach in this report. And I also encourage you to take a look at the Safe System Approach framework that was developed actually about the same time. So in 2019, we were doing a lot of this instrumental work as a profession, and these two guides show for it. And thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing from Oakland and Chicago next.
Thank you, Sarah. Excited to get into the case studies, and that's great information on how the safe system approach has worked in other places and can work in the US. So if I remember the run of show correctly, we should go to Jason.
Great, thank you. Folks see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yep.
That's great, thank you. I'm Jason Patton with the City of Oakland's Department of Transportation. I'm a senior transportation planner and I supervise the department's bicycle and pedestrian program. I'm going to provide an overview of what Oakland's, how Oakland's bikeway network has developed and the kind of data we've put together to kind of keep track of that and tell the story. And this is really kind of a 50-year story that we're working with. At least the kind of contemporary roots of what we're doing now date back to the 1970s. And what I've shown here, which is more than we're going to be able to talk through today, but note the underlined rows that go by decade with bike mode share and numbers of facilities. And note that we've had 3 bike plans along the way, as well as kind of the pieces falling in place, both with kind of advocacy, culture, and funding. And importantly, accelerated progress in the most recent decades. This main part of my presentation, I'm going to walk through a series of slides that show the development of Oakland's bikeway network by decade. And starting in 1980, let me note that a little bit about Oakland to help locate people. We're on the west side, we're on the east side of the bay from San Francisco. We share a border with Berkeley to our north. We have 400,000 people in 55 square miles. And we have a waterfront that you see on the lower edge of the slide. And we also have some fairly significant hills, which spans the area across the top of the slide. And as of 1980, Oakland's bikeway network was effectively recreational routes in the Oakland Hills that I think are coincident with the kind of popularity of road cycling in the United States in the 1970s. And a little bit of work around Lake Merritt and towards the waterfront, but primarily recreational facilities. By 1990, we see more of that with more work along the waterfront and notably Oakland's first explicitly commuter bike route connecting Berkeley to the edge of downtown. By 2000, we're beginning to build bike lanes, shown here in red. The yellow is sign-only bike routes, the green are bike paths. By 2010, we figured out how to do coordination with our paving program and are starting to significantly increase mileage. You'll note, though, that there's very little that resembles a network other than sign-only bike routes. And then by 2020, Oakland has established a Department of Transportation, passed an infrastructure bond with a significant amount of money for paving and transportation projects. And we start shifting from network establishment to network quality. Now, there's still work to be done with network establishment, but the kind of bones of a network, at least in multiple neighborhoods, is starting to take shape. Looking at the same information by year as a line graph, you'll note the yellow line, which are the sign-only bike routes, which had a large rise in the 70s, 80s, 90s, up till about 2000. And then the red line is the bike lanes, with that really getting underway in the late 1990s and beginning to finally overtake the bike routes about 2010. And this is not only kind of production of bike lanes, but also the conversion of things that were previously bike routes to better facilities. The steady climb of bike paths in green, and the kind of limited growth in bike boulevards shown in purple, and also to date of separated bike lanes shown in the lime green. And I think I think what we're looking at is potentially with like, it's the bike boulevard area and the separated bike lane area where we're working to hit our stride. And there's kind of tremendous investment happening in that area right now. The kind of by decade snapshot doesn't show that yet. My sense is kind of looking at this history and looking at this trajectory, that it's the 2030 slide, it's the decade we're going into where the separated bike lane production and the bike boulevard production really kicks up. And then with the defining character being kind of raising the quality of a network that had been established by previous decades of work. To tip a little bit into the data management practices, I wanted to note that, that one thing I'm not showing here is the rise of buffered bike lanes. And that's something that we very much figured out in the 2010s and have a significant number of them. But as a record-keeping practice, it's not included here. And I think that speaks a little bit to both the importance and the challenge of the data management and the record keeping, and the challenges of doing this over very long periods of time to be able to tell the kind of long-term story and the long-term trajectory. But then also our ways of thinking about our facilities change, or our facility classifications change. And that means effectively going back to rebuild like a classification system to be able to tell that new story. So that's work we're interested and excited to do. To kind of wrap up on the managing the data and the telling the story, we have three main data sets that we maintain to be able to do this work. One is what we call bikeway segments. That's basically the current snapshot of a network, where basically every segment has unique characteristics across its length. So over roughly 200 miles of roadway, we have roughly 1,000 segments to characterize those uniquely. Separately from that, we track bikeway projects, and this is something we got into later when we started to go back and realize the importance of, okay, this bikeway project did this on this segment, and then subsequent projects came back and started to improve upon what was previously done. And so the bikeway projects allow us to capture all the projects that have been built through time. And so it's the kind of the accumulation or the sedimentation of all those projects through time that lead to the current bikeway network, which is captured in terms of these segments. But without the bikeway project data, you don't know how things got done or when they got done. The third main data set is what we call the Bikeways Time-Lapse Project, which is the data behind the series of by-decade maps that we showed. We have maps for basically all of the years in which there was a change to the network. I believe it's about 35 or 40 maps over the 45-year period. And each of those has a corresponding layer in GIS to have that information be spatialized so we can kind of keep track of it, query it, and manipulate it. And importantly, all of this is drawn off of the City of Oakland's streets GIS information, which has a lot of efficiencies in being able to coordinate with projects by others and being able to use other City of Oakland data sets and bring those data sets to bear for the benefit of the bike network. There's an ongoing workflow to keep this in place and keep it current. When new projects get built, we might have to keep segments. We might have to split segments because that segment's no longer uniform. And if we want to capture the difference, we need to be dividing those segments into increasingly smaller slices. New projects come online and we need to capture those. New projects get built and then those change what's out there on particular segments. We do this on a twice yearly basis, and then we update the time-lapse map on an annual basis. And we share it all out publicly through this web map, which is what this screenshot is of, existing and proposed bikeways, the time-lapse project, which I featured today, the Bikeways projects data set, so people can see what's being built or what's coming, as well as go back and figure out what built something that already exists. Our bike sign projects, in addition to our layer of kind of individual bicycle signs, and then all of our bike parking information, all in this one web map portal. And then we do a twice annual newsletter on bike plan implementation to kind of push the information out in more of a narrative form, along with doing a by the numbers to report on certain metrics. namely bikeway mileage, bike parking spaces, and the implementation of our bike guide sign program. And with that, I will hand off the screen.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. It's really incredible the work that you've put into that data and the work that Oakland has put into that data set and how it kind of tells that story over time. It was just amazing to see that really laid out. And I hope the communities who are looking at their map and seeing that it might look more like your 1990 map than your 2020 map, kind of use that perspective to think about how they can push forward and reach kind of where you are now and where you'll be in the next 10 years. And with that, I'd like to welcome David and Jeremy on here.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Jason. Let me just share my screen real quick. Okay, is that showing up?
Yep.
Cool. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is David Smith with the Chicago Department of Transportation. I manage the city's Complete Streets team, which includes our bicycle and pedestrian programs. It also includes our traffic safety education team, which is called our Safe Ambassadors, as well as our Vision Zero program. Also joined here with Jeremy Cuevas from the Northwest Center in the city of Chicago. Jeremy has been an amazing partner in our neighborhood bike network process in the Belmont-Cragen community, and Jeremy oversees the Belmont-Cragen Youth Council, which we'll talk through. So I'll talk for a couple minutes and then pass it over to Jeremy to really get the kind of on the ground perspective of what we've been calling our neighborhood bike network process. And it really is a shift in how we're thinking about and approaching bicycle network planning and implementation. Chicago is very much a city of neighborhoods. We have 77 official community areas, 125 official neighborhoods. We have, a vast range of culture, history, perceptions of biking and cycling in particular. And so we created this, the table that I'm showing right now to help us kind of visualize and get a grasp on the most effective and efficient ways to build networks in different neighborhoods across the city. Every neighborhood is a little bit different and requires a different approach. It's not a one size fits all in a city like Chicago. And so we created this graphic here. A community sort of starts off with a growing interest where there's sort of grassroots interest in cycling and mobility, transportation, but it's a neighborhood that's not really well served by the bike network. That's a good spot where the Belmont-Cragen community was previous to last year. And so we kind of work these different stages out so that we start introducing quick wins, really bring more visibility to cycling. In every neighborhood across Chicago, there are people biking, but there are at different rates and at different levels of visibility. And so as we start to socialize biking and expand the network over time, that feeds into a growing enthusiasm for cycling and a mainstreaming of biking. And then we continue to strengthen the bike network. And so this was really helpful for us just to kind of level set us and help develop strategies throughout the entire city for different neighborhoods. So we created this process called the Neighborhood Bike Network Process, in which we worked hand in hand with community stakeholders, community organizations to identify, plan, and design and implement a bicycle network within the community. We tried this out in 2021. This was very much an experiment, and I think there was really a ton just to build off of, and I think that this will be a big part of the foundation of how we expand our network going forward. we did this process in 3 communities on Chicago's west side. Today we'll focus in on the Belmont-Cragen community. But the goals of the process are on the screen, and it was really about better understanding the role of cycling within the community. So we formed a task force of about 25 different organizations, and we intentionally had a very diverse task force where the room was not filled with your typical cycling advocates. We had folks who were working on housing, for folks that were working on public health or economic development, employment, education. We really tried and worked hard to engage younger residents in these communities, which we'll hear from in a few minutes. And so that was really powerful to make the connection and for us to all better understand the role that bicycling plays in these other great efforts that are going on within every community to create great neighborhoods. And so we really wanted to empower community members to not just be a part of the process, but to be decision makers in the process. And in terms of the network, we worked really hard to establish from the very first meeting that we had that this was not just another planning process. We're not trying to just create another document that sits on the shelf. This really is about implementation and about getting things done quickly because they're needed. We feel a sense of urgency. And then also to understand, identify, build relationships so that we can take on longer term projects as well. The photo on the bottom is a ribbon cutting. Jeremy's in the middle there. We also have our city council member for the neighborhood, Alderman Cardona, some folks from the neighborhood cutting a ribbon on brand new divvy bike share stations. Behind them is a neighborhood greenway with lowered speed limit, contraflow bike lanes, etc. And so one of the first steps that we did is we took a look at the density of bicycle infrastructure in all 77 community areas throughout the city of Chicago. And that's what this map highlights here. The darker colors meaning that there's a higher concentration or higher density of bicycle infrastructure. The lighter colors being a lower. And the hatched out areas are signify where our bike share system was expanding in 2021 and then also in 2022. So by the end of this year, our bike share system will be servicing the entire city of Chicago. And overlaying these two things together it was a big driver in how we ended up selecting the 3 neighborhoods, including Belmont-Cragen, for this new planning and implementation process. Divvy bikes were coming to the neighborhood. So our approach was that as access to bikes is increasing, we have to make sure that there are streets that are designated as safe places to bike. And we very much went into this with the recognition that the only way we can create and provide a useful system for biking is by developing a network. We can't do it one street at a time. We have to really pour a lot of resources into a concentrated area and build up the network. That also allows us to really more easily connect the dots between biking and economic development, public health, public safety, education, those core issues that are at the top of everybody's minds. It's very difficult to make the connection and to understand the role of biking when you're only talking about one street at a time. So it was very much intensely focused on building a network for a community where there was a ton of interest and has not been well served by the network previously. So Belmont-Cragen, circled here on yellow on the west side, northwest side of Chicago, had a low density of bikeways. The red lines on the map, those were all installed last year. I'll show a blow up image of that. But previous to this effort, at the beginning of 2021, a year ago, there were essentially no bike lanes in Belmont-Cragen, a very small number. Belmont-Cragen also has the highest population of residents under the age of 18 in the city of Chicago. As I mentioned, a growing enthusiasm for biking, and the divvy bike share system was introduced last summer. And so we formed a task force with a number of neighborhood stakeholders. We held a series of 3 task force meetings and outlined this general flow where we really started out talking about the perceptions of biking and barriers to biking, opportunities, and it really key was understanding important destinations. So before we started talking about any streets, we really focused in on getting to know the neighborhood, getting to know the people in the neighborhood, and how people in the neighborhood could best benefit from a network. We did online surveys that went out to the community, created draft networks, and had a comment period on all of that. But we really, forming this task force really allowed us to lean and tap into the community stakeholders and the residents to be the voice and the face of this effort, so that it wasn't the city coming in to do this. This was really a ground up approach. And through this survey and these discussions, we talked about the perceptions of biking, challenges and opportunities in the community. And as I mentioned, the destinations. And that was really a great lesson learned for us. And I think a big part of why this effort was successful. We really just started not even worrying about which streets make the most sense. Let's just talk about where people want to go, where they need to go, and how the network can best serve them. Once we map all of those assets out or those destinations within the neighborhood, then from there, let's figure out the best streets, the most comfortable streets to connect people to all those important places. This was a very fast process. It was a very intense process. We started this in January of 2021, and by the summer, we were installing a ton of projects in the Belmont-Cragen community. Everything shown here on red is essentially what we installed last summer and last fall, with the exception of just a couple of projects which will carry over into this spring. But everything shown here in red, none of that was there previously. Only the couple of blue lines on the map were existing routes. So you can really see how we truly did create a network of infrastructure within the neighborhood. The red dots are new divvy stations. So we worked very closely to plan the locations of the divvy stations so that they overlap with bike routes. And you can see, even just this high level map, how many parks, these green icons here are schools and libraries. So we really tried to make sure that the network connected people to those places, as well as to the surrounding neighborhoods and the network that does exist outside of the neighborhood. And so last year alone, we installed over 13 miles of bikeways just in the Belmont-Cragen neighborhood alone. We've got another 5 miles that are ready to go and will be happening this year. We installed, as part of this effort, over 100 bike racks from the city. Jeremy and his colleagues also worked on a project to design another 50 custom bike racks, which were installed. So 150 bike racks. The Divvy bike share system expanded in the neighborhood. The Belmont-Cragen community, because of all the work that Jeremy and the Youth Council have been doing on the ground, because of the infrastructure, because of other education events that happened in the community, the Belmont-Cragen neighborhood saw over 16,000 bike share trips just in the last few months of 2021 alone, and by far saw more Divvy bike share trips than any other community in the recent expansion area. So it's been incredibly powerful and incredibly impactful. There's been a number of organized bike rides that Jeremy and myself have collaborated on. We really made a point to involve and empower young people in the community, and I think we've done a good job at that. We want to keep that going. And the most important thing to us is the relationships that we've built, because this is not just a one-year effort. This is really something that we want to continue on for years to come, continue to expand the network and continue to upgrade the network. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeremy talk for a few minutes about his perspective and experience going through this process.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And I don't know if you want to answer the question in the chat, or is there going to be a lot of time for that? But I wanted to address that question. Maybe you can answer it best, Dave, if it's the right time to answer it. The question.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Jeremy. I'll take a look and see what it says.
Okay, cool, perfect. But yeah, hey everyone, Jeremy Cuevas, Northwest Center youth organizer. Yeah, like Dave said, this was a true definition of what it looks like when when the communities work with the city of Chicago. It wasn't a perfect process, but it was, in my 7-8 years of organizing, this was the most effective way to accomplish something like this. The amount of leadership that CDOT empowered us with, empowered the young people with, to come alongside them to make these decisions, was truly powerful. Was truly something that we can learn from, where we had young people, older adults, residents who are visually impaired with disabilities come to the table, not just to any table, but the decision-making table, where we're going to map out, where these lanes should go, right, and why. Talk about it over lunch, right, whatever the case was, and map out where the divvy stations should be. And the most moving part to me was the 17-mile whatever bike lanes, the over 13 divvy stations, were all identified in collaboration with CDOT. I remember youth saying, wait, this should be moved here because young people come after school here and could get on a bike route and go this way home. It was just a beautiful time to collaborate, share ideas, and just come together, come alongside CDOT to make these decisions. Before we came along with CDOT, our community was already starting to talk about biking, and it would just happen so perfectly, where we linked up and started working together. But like Dave said, we had, previous to these 17 miles, we only had a mile and a half, I think it was, and those were poorly, you couldn't really see it, right? And you had people riding bikes on sidewalks, you had people riding bikes in the parks because they couldn't ride bikes on the streets because they didn't feel safe riding bikes on the street without having a lane to themselves. So we're hearing all of this from our residents and our young people, which is a third of the population of Belmont-Cragen. So it's 90,000 residents. A third of them are students under the age of 18. So they rely on these services. They rely on CTA, bike lanes. They rely on these things to get around. So they were the ones really leading the charge. And, of course, parents and older adults have questions, right? Because most of them drive, and they're like, well, is this going to take up parking? And then there's so many questions that we were able to answer, that CDOT was able to answer along with us. And just to answer all those questions that folks had, folks raised concerns, we were able to talk about it. So now it's like, for the folks that weren't involved in that process, right? We weren't able to reach 90,000 people, but we reached a good majority of them to move forward with the project. So now we're in this phase of, if you weren't a part of this, if you didn't know what was going on, right, or you just missed it or whatever, we want to get you up to speed. Come on our bike rides that are happening this summer, right? We want to hear your input. We want to hear what you have to say. But I couldn't say enough more of David and his team. They were phenomenal. And like Dave said, relationships are everything, right? And this was built on building a relationship first with the community. And I think that's why it was so successful. When you intentionally want to build relationships with young people and community-based organizations to have a successful project, this is what you get. And we're just so happy. Our young people are excited. We can't wait for this upcoming year to put these bike lanes to use, right? Even though folks have been doing it in the winter, we have some hardcore riders that ride in the winter still, but we're excited for this summer where, we could fully enjoy the bike lanes. And lastly, we went from a transportation desert, the youth council named Belmont-Cragen a transportation desert because we had nothing. And now we are glad to say we are a transportation oasis in Belmont-Cragen that connects to other networks in the city. So yeah, this is what it looks like when the city works closely with community-based organizations and their people. You get success. Thank you.
And Jeremy, I'll just add, when we started the process, even before we started, I remember meeting with you and some of the youth council, and the dream was like, 3 to 4 to 5 miles of projects over the next couple of years. And we really, as we started talking through it, really said we need to do more, we need to do it faster. And we ended up with, a year and a half later, 18 miles of projects that'll be implemented.
Yeah, just quickly, and then that was our goal too, right? Was 3 to 5 miles of bike lanes, 5 divvy stations, and over a course of conversations with the community, we were able to get more. And I couldn't say enough of our elected officials, our aldermen, also in the ward, that played a big role in this. Alderman Cardona, Villegas, Alderman Villegas, and Alderman Rebollas, huge supporters of what we were doing. They jumped along with us and supported us as well. So yeah, it was a truly successful campaign. You rarely get those. You always run into issues and battles, but we run into some speed humps, but hey, that's part of the process. And yeah, I can't say enough about the teamwork that we did. So thank you.
Yeah, and thank you both for sharing that. It's such an incredible story about how the Chicago DOT empowered your community and how you both worked together to create that network in such a short time. So we're really excited to see more communities take on processes like that and really co-create networks with their communities.
Yeah, Ken, I'm so sorry, but we have one of our youth council members on that just wanted to share a quick quote from our work together. His name is Yuan, who's on. I don't know if the attendees could unmute themselves, or I don't think they could, right?
I don't think that's an option.
That's maybe Yuan, if you could write in the chat, that'll be great too. Thanks, bro.
Yeah, sorry, I don't see a way to get him on. Wish I could. And so we're running up against time now. Hopefully panelists can hang out for an extra like 5-10 minutes so we can get a question in. But I want to hand it off to Amelia so she can kind of talk about one of the motivations for doing this report, which is our bicycle friendly community program and making it better as well.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Ken. And thanks so much to all the other speakers, especially the case studies. It's really awesome to hear how this work happened in those places. So like Ken said, I'm here to talk a little bit about how the League is incorporating the report results from the Benchmarking Bike Networks report into our programs, like the Bicycle Friendly Community Program. And just a really quick intro, the BFC program, a lot of people think of it as an awards program. We recognize communities. We evaluate them on what they're doing to be bicycle friendly, but it's not just an awards program, it's also a feedback program where it's designed to give communities of all shapes and sizes feedback to help them improve and to help them incorporate the changes that will make them become even more bike friendly. So whether you're already a platinum level Portland, Oregon, or you're just starting out at the honorable mention category, or applied for the first time and didn't get an award at all, it's really important to us to give feedback to every community to help them improve. And we also hold ourselves to that standard that we want to continually improve. So last August, we announced that we were going to be taking the application offline this spring to make some updates. And I'll put the link in the chat to this blog post if you want to read more. But just to give you a sense, this is how the BFC application has looked for years in terms of how we ask about bike networks. So you don't need to read all of this, but just know that we were collecting mileage numbers from communities that applied on broken down by off-street mileage, and then their on-street networks broken down by speed limits, because we were trying to incorporate some of the really important, facility selection criteria, guidelines that the report talks about. What these numbers lack is the context of where the facilities exist, how connected they are. So just to give you a sense of sort of how we evaluated communities before, here are the numbers from Oakland's application when they applied in 2018. And so you can see the numbers, but you really don't get the picture that Jason shared in his presentation today. And even more so with our BFC report card, historically, we report on these 10 building blocks of a bicycle-friendly community, including these 2 metrics from within the engineering section of the application. And they come out as just raw percentages of facilities, bike facilities to roadway network. But again, it sort of lacks the context of the distribution of the facilities, the location, the quality. A community that has nothing but sharrows looks the same as a community that has a ton of protected bike lanes. And on the back end, we're evaluating those things very differently. But we've recognized over the years that our report cards don't do a good job of telling that story. And we really need to do a better job of advocating for networks and working to tell that story so that local advocates can use the BFC report card the way we intended to advocate for these things of better, more connected networks. So that communities like Oakland, we can show the progress over time or the map of how these connected networks exist in the context of the neighborhoods and the places and the people who they're serving. So I really encourage everybody to read the report and to stay tuned for more updates from us. The BFC application will be going live in May, and we'll be releasing a lot more information between now and then. But the goals of these updates include advocating for connected networks, for the safe system approach that Sarah talked about, for context appropriate facilities, for equitable facilities, for an inclusive planning process, and for data. Really encouraging communities to collect and track this kind of data like you've heard Chicago and Oakland talking about today, and figuring out a way to help advocate for all these improvements to the bike networks, recognizing that is the #1 way to help more people feel comfortable biking. So with that very brief presentation, I think we are going to try to stick on for a few minutes for questions. So I'll stop sharing my screen and hand it back over to Ken.
Yeah, thank you for that very quick presentation. We're 1 minute over time, so I think maybe get one question that all of the panelists can answer kind of quickly. We got a question in the question and answer pod about a road diet that was planned with community engagement over years, and then the facilities weren't implemented. And kind of like how, well, as experts, as agency staff, how should advocates engage productively? When we have a setback, what is the best way we can make that something that points in the direction of a bike network moving forward? What is your advice to the advocates who attend a call like this hosted by the League of American Bicyclists?
Well, Ken, I can just
anyone
jump
can
in.
Answer.
So just real quick, one thought, not knowing the context of it, but I think there's a lot of power in pilot projects and trying things out. And so if there are ways to advocate for just getting something on the ground and trying it out, that can be really transformative. Like we've had examples of that where we have made some big changes to the street in more of like a temporary nature so that we can do some before and after data collection and sort of show people on the ground how something will work, how it won't work, but at least learn lessons. And I think that's been the pilot project has been a good strategy for us to bring people along who have otherwise been skeptical.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Those demonstration projects sometimes prove that if you build it permanently, they will come. And getting an idea, collecting data while you're out there for how many people are riding, do they feel safe riding, what kind of improvements do they want to see if this were to be permanently installed, do they want to see bump outs at the intersections as well, and things like that. I also think working to understand the political hurdles, I think advocates can be especially helpful in creating those connections to the whole system or the whole network where those nodes are missing, going to their appointed and elected officials and saying, fill in this segment because it's important for XYZ. Like you heard from the Northwest Side Housing Group, I think that those people on the ground can say, make this connection because it's really critical to us getting to XYZ services. And then also funding. I mean, there are grants out there through philanthropic organizations. So working with your Department of Transportation to apply for those grants to help increase those dollars around these capital improvements, pushing your agencies to apply for funding if the budget is not filling that gap within the city budget, applying for funding and things like that through private and public sources. And the last thing I'll stress, big picture, is public-private partnerships. I think on all of this is really important. And then letting your agency know if something is not designed right. Because the devil really is in the details. Say we need a separated bike lane here, even though you gave us a standard bike lane or sharrows because X, Y, Z. So just that feedback loop, I think, is also important.
I can speak to it too. A little bit like my typed answer to the question. I think I think open lines of communication are like really important, and this is something that I try and do a lot with our advocates. That we don't always agree, but we have a very good understanding of where we're coming from, and I have a good understanding of what their goals are and what they're trying to achieve, and I think they have a good understanding of what our capacity is and what our constraints are because of that active dialogue. Then you add elected officials to that, with the staff, advocates, and elected officials being on the same page, and then like really exciting things can happen. So think about like the systematic approach to build capacity for the delivery of projects. And it may be particularly disappointing when a particularly important project comes unraveled, but the individual projects don't really matter a whole lot at the end of the day. A network is the accumulation of many, many, many projects over a very long time. And so how can even the projects that don't go well be ways to kind of build that capacity and get on the same page? Because, you learn something, you might not have been successful, but there's some learning there for the capacity building to continue with ever greater production of more projects that accumulate as a network.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think it's so important to understand those open lines of communication and where everyone is coming from, and help get people on the same page. I'm really hopeful with things like the vulnerable road user safety assessment that every state is required to do under the recently passed bipartisan infrastructure law, that every state is going to have an event where vulnerable road user safety, biking and walking is front and center, and is pushing that kind of safe system approach that we're seeing from the National Roadway Safety Strategy. So it's a really great moment that we have here for a lot of great dialogue about building better bike networks and safer systems. I think we need to wrap it up, but I saw in the chat that Juan Marino typed out his comment about his involvement in the Youth Council, so I'm just going to read that before signing off. So, hello, my name is Juan Marino, former member of the Youth Council. Working with the Youth Council was such a blessing, and the work we did truly impacted not only myself, but the community I live in as well. We were able to provide bike lanes and improve the safety for all cyclists in the community. As a cyclist myself, it meant a lot and was wonderful to experience. The Youth Council is amazing. And that story and process from Chicago is just really incredible, and I hope more communities adopt that approach of empowering the communities they want to serve to make sure that they're serving their needs and those kind of everyday destinations that they want to reach. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank anyone who's watching this on YouTube later, and thank you panelists for sharing your experience and expertise, both in the creation of this report and today. All right.
Thanks, Al.
Signing off.